Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, with another Isaac Asimov short story review. And the next one in the series is in this issue of Infinity Science Fiction, where you can see it advertised. Meet Lenny, Isaac Asimov's useless robot. So, this is kind of weirdy. It's lost. But it is January, and that's January of 1958, in case you're wondering. Now, let's see here. It has that. Inside, it's just listed as a story. The story is Lenny, Isaac Asimov, on page 54. Okay. Now you get up to 54, and there's a very small blurb, and the only artwork associated with the story. And here we have it. Now there's two parts. There's a whole page here. There's the robot itself, Lenny, kind of sitting down in a pose that would become a little more obvious as to what it is. It's a rather odd looking object here on the other side of what's supposed to be obviously a Susan Calvin. Will be explained as we get along. This it says illustrated by Bill Bowman. Okay, another artist. And over here, these are a couple other prominent Alfred Lanning and Bill Bogart, and her other fellow roboticists at the United States Robots and Mechanical Men Incorporated. Okay, so I'm sure Peter Bogart and Alfred Lanning. Yeah, okay, so Alfred Lanning would be the old one, and Peter Bogart's the younger one. So, and some sort of a waveform there. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Maybe that's the sound of the voice of the robot, if it's anything recognizable at all. Now, and the blurb reads, "What's the use of a robot that can perform no job at all and may be dangerous to boot?" Now, what do we mean by dangerous? Robots, of course, are the first law ground into them, but Lenny, as we quickly gather, is a defective robot. And the explanation was that they were allowing tours of the robot making facility, that there was a keyboard used for programming the robots that was left unattended, and somebody in a tour group passing through just thought, oh, I'll push some buttons randomly for no particular reason, Ringo Starr says, I'm just a born lever puller, But, yeah, Joe Submarine, you have to know where that's from. But, I mean, there's just people who do that. And it was supposed to have been deactivated. It wasn't. And some kid, they name him, but I don't, there's no relevance to that. They just wanted to seem realistic. And played with this. Put some random whatever into the programming of a positronic brain. Apparently, once the positronic brain has had something defective in its programming, it's not like you could just wipe it clean and start from scratch all over again. I don't understand that. But okay. So they go on with it, and they find they've got a defective robot. And then Susan Calvin takes an interest in this robot. And one of the things that happens along the way, and this is why we talk about it being possibly dangerous, is that it's clumsy. Somebody got their arm broken by this robot. Well, they were doing something around it they were not supposed to be doing. This robot, as we said, is defective. It would never hurt somebody or intentionally allow anybody to be hurt, but being so defective, it might, say, in protecting itself, try to push aside somebody's arm and not know its own strength, because it's physically a big and powerful machine. So don't let this picture make you think that the robot is smaller than Susan Calvin. It's just kind of, you can see it's behind her. It's in the distance. It's actually taller than she is, if you can get it to stand credibly. So It's large, it's powerful, and if you try to make like you're attacking it, it may simply protect itself, third law, in a manner that, if it had better coordination and so forth, would have been totally harmless. So the first law is absolutely operative. She could tell that. But what is the use of it? Well, in all of these robot stories that have involved Susan Calvin by name that I've ever seen, this and one other are the only chances for her to have a genuinely human, womanly emotion. Most of the time, she's really more of a character in a story rather than like an actual human being. Although I suppose some living human beings can become like that character, but that's outside the point. The point is that not only she's just this person, this is her life. Her professional life is her life. So I mean, presumably she must eat and sleep, but there's no evidence that she does either of these things any more than absolutely necessary by the simple physical requirements of being physiologically a human woman, a human being, really. But early on, way, way, way back, she had the chance to feel romantic feelings, to think that maybe, despite being 30 high years old, a man might be interested in her, even though he might be 5 or, as originally written, 10 years younger than she was. That's quite a disparity. 5 could happen. In fact, probably does. For that matter, I mean, you could find somebody your own age. It's rare, but it happens. Or now we get this story. See, Lenny, strangely enough, I say it malfunctions, but it malfunctions in a surprisingly highly specific way. It functions like a human child. It calls her mommy. It's pleased to have. Well, now let's take a look. We saw this mysterious object here. Okay, it is not an Arthur C. Clarke spacecraft, though some do look like that. Total coincidence, I assure you. It is some sort of a baby rattle. And now you look at his pose, like a baby might just sit, and maybe even they're doing well to be able to sit up, just kind of looking at their own fingers or whatever. At various points, he even sucks his own fingers or thumb or some digit. It's not clear which one. And this is a baby. It's like a baby, and she gets a chance to have all of maternal feelings suddenly come out. She's explaining all these good reasons why this robot is still useful to have, and even in this, there's kind of an interesting parallel to another story that I have to admit I've never cared much for this story. It I just don't. I don't know. It just rubs me the wrong way or something, and I'm just like, it's like reading a story about somebody gets hurt, and then 90% of the story is just their slow convalescence as they recover, as they have to regain the ability to stand up, and then to walk, and then to this, and then that, and it's a struggle, and you could call it a story, but it's kind of a story you just suffer through. It's that kind of a story would be very difficult to find appealing. So, but she has this interesting story, she says, about why it would be. She says it was to continue learning techniques of teaching robots. So, she wants to be able to teach robots. And this one, despite its deficiency, has the ability to be taught very slowly, probably as slowly as a human baby. Furthermore, she seems to be aware of some limitation that will cause this robot's maturity to stop at probably the equivalent age/functionality of a 5-year-old human. I don't know how she knows that. As we see the robot, it probably isn't even reached the age level of 2. So it doesn't have much, like I say, much potential there. But it could be her baby, and now she has this chance for very, very maternal feelings to come out, and that's why she's protecting it, which could well be. But she is at the same time at least rationalizing and maybe potentially finding for real some use in making a robot that isn't so single function. That maybe a robot could be trainable so that you train it to do one thing and then later on you train it to do something else. I mean, they've designed the robots like human beings. So human beings are very, very, flexible, malleable, entities that can learn to do many, many different sorts of things. Why can't a robot do the same? And where does that come? Where does that resemble? Strangely, this, which I would say is my absolute least favorite. There are definitely some genuinely bad stories, and others that, kind of, if that was all there was, I wouldn't be doing this series. Thankfully, there's not too many like that. Although this one, I think, does kind of go in that category. But one of my favorite stories, and that was Profession. It was about human beings being able to be programmed to do a certain skill. You put in a tape, and it gives them all the skills to use a Beeman, spectral analyzer or something, and you're good at that, and that's all you know how to do. And then the next year, when a new kind of spectrograph comes out, you're clueless. You can't even just take the knowledge you got from the machine and add a little bit of human learning on top of that to supplement the slight differences between the Hensler spectrograph and the Beeman spectrograph, and so forth. So it's like you should be able to learn. Learning is a great thing. It's a powerful thing. And he has the highest praise for that, as he's now getting into a period of his life where writing nonfiction has become a more and more significant part of his writing career. And suddenly, we need to encourage the young to understand and appreciate, just really go to school, learn stuff, learn real stuff, mathematics, hard sciences. You should know these things. And that's why it was one of the reasons that Asimov is probably one of the strongest, truly hard science fiction writers. So he has a few of the usual tropes in science fiction. Faster than light travel, as in like the hyperspace, the jump as he called it, or future societies or aliens of various sorts. But other than those, you kind of grant a small area where things are possible, even though they're not. And other than that, you try to keep everything consistent, logical, and in all other respects, truly and fully scientific. So, and that makes for a true, hard science fiction. So, to the point that one of the stories isn't often recognized. You might remember the one about the Whiff of Death, or the Death Dealer, several titles, where none of those science fiction tropes are used, but it is science of chemistry, both the chemistry involved in using chemicals to commit a murder, as well as just other chemical things, and another way of doing to try to trip up the criminal in a sort of Columbo-like fashion. So, all of these kinds of things add up to good, hard science fiction. And so that makes him one of the truly greats. Now what passes for science fiction oftentimes bends more and more into the legend, the myth, almost, even fantasy, maybe not quite fairy tale, occasionally even that perhaps. And the distinction between that, more swashbuckling. In place of Star Trek, we now get Star Wars, and then more crazy things like that. So this was the hard science aspect that's still here. Why not do the same with a robot? Instead of building a robot, despite its human form, to some very specific function, be allowed to train or reprogram that robot for a different function. Since it has a basically human format, with fingers and arms, and it's an anthropomorphic thing. It could operate it could drive a car. It could operate machinery just like any human being could. Any different kind of machinery. Any sort of thing should be at least programmable, regardless of whether it's learnable in a conventional sense, like a human being having to train on something. So, is she finding an excuse to keep her baby alive, or is she, or is there something to it that might at least potentially be of some value, whichever being the real priority in her emotional life? That's kind of an open question, and I think the story leaves it that way. Anyway, that's what I have to say about Lenny, which, by the way, is now the newest or last of the robot stories to be gathered into the short stories, actually all of them, that will be gathered up into the rest of the robots. So, in fact, the only ones I haven't covered so far as I give this would be the novels, the Elijah Bailey. Even both of those now are older than this story. So that is literally the newest story we gathered into the rest of the robots. It's awesome, the complete robot and so forth, but that's where it first gets gathered up into a book. So I think that means I'm done looking at that for this series. Well, thanks for listening.